10 Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. Wall Street just kicked off what could be another roller coaster week with President Trump's sweeping tariffs set to hit Wednesday. 30 minutes after the opening bell, you can see the markets are down. There you see the Dow down about 150 points right now. For months, the president has moved the goalposts and the deadlines on tariffs, but now sounds dead set on hitting the whole world this week.
So how many countries will be in that initial tranche?
You'd start with all countries, so let's see what happens. There are many countries.
Let's go right to NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what else is the president saying about this tariff rollout?
Hi there, Anna. Good morning. Well, as you just played right there, the president saying that this would start with all countries, these so-called reciprocal tariffs on Wednesday. But what we should point out that right now, 2 days before they're set to take effect, there is still a lot of uncertainty here about exactly which countries, what the tariff rate will be. And so in his interview with NBC's Kristen Welker over the weekend, the president also said that he couldn't care less if foreign automakers raise their prices because people would start making American-made cars. I couldn't care less, he said. I hope they raise their prices because if they do, people are going to buy American-made cars. Although, Anna, we should point out, the auto industry is so interconnected that American-made cars often use foreign-made parts. So there are a lot of questions about how this will roll out over the next couple of days. And as you see, the market's very jittery as we start this week.
Yeah, currently down about 125 points right now as far as the Dow goes. And we'll talk more about the impact of the tariffs a little bit later this hour. Meantime, Gabe, in that same phone interview with our colleague Kristen Welker, President Trump once again floated one of his favorite hypotheticals, running for a third term. But he said he wasn't joking. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's right. And look, President Trump has seemingly joked about this now for several months. The first time was back in November at an event, and he's mentioned it at rallies before that he could potentially serve a third or fourth term. Well, in his interviews, he said with Kristen, he talked about how he said that there are plans. There are not plans, though. He said there are methods which you could do it. I'm not joking, but it is far too early to think about it. Now, Kristen also asked him whether one of those methods could be, for example, Vice President J.D. Vance running for president, and if he won the election, could he somehow pass the baton to President Trump? Well, President Trump said that that was one way, but there are others. And then he was also asked about this right there on Air Force One last night. Listen to what he had to say.
I don't want to talk about a third term now because no matter how you look at it, we got a long time to go. We have a long time.
And again, Anna, he had been saying this now for several months. And this is the first time, though, in his interview with Kristen where he specifically said, I am not joking, certainly a much more serious tone, Anna.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez at the White House for us. Thank you. Also this week, Elon Musk faces his first political litmus test since becoming a polarizing Trump White House figure. Last night, the world's richest man rallied for the Republican candidate in Wisconsin's state Supreme Court race. Musk's high-profile activity there helping this become the most expensive state Supreme Court campaign in U.S. history. And yes, he was wearing a cheese head. Now, as part of all of that money being spent there, he paid two voters $1 million each in a controversial raffle that Wisconsin's attorney general tried to fight in court. NBC News correspondent Julia Jester was there. She joins us now from Madison, Wisconsin. And here in New York, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst Susan Del Percio and Democratic strategist and Salty Politics author Julie Roginski. Let's go first to Julia there in Wisconsin. So what was Elon Musk's pitch to voters last night, Julia?
Well, Anna, I think by now we're used to state and local elections becoming nationalized, but last night may have been one of the first times that I have heard someone say that a state election could determine the, quote, future of the world. Elon Musk really raising the stakes last night, while the Supreme Court election here could definitely handle matters like abortion or immigration cases in this state. He honed in on one specific aspect, and that's redistricting, and that could affect the balance of power in Congress as well. He really leaned into that in his remarks last night. Here's what he had to say.
If the Supreme Court is able to redraw the districts, they will gerrymander the districts and deprive Wisconsin of 2 House seats on the Republican side. What's happening on Tuesday is a vote for which party controls the U.S. House of Representatives. That is why it is so significant. And whichever party controls the House, it to a significant degree controls the country, which then steers the course of Western civilization.
So quite the implications there, Anna. And he also made the case that if voters like what Doge is doing, if they like the government spending cuts, which the crowd there really supportive of Elon did support the Doge measures, he said that this race is consequential for that. It's worth noting among registered voters in Wisconsin, though, a majority of them view Elon Musk unfavorably. So we'll see whether his involvement in this race tomorrow will help or hurt the conservative candidate's cause, Anna.
And that very same state Supreme Court at the heart of this race decided not to weigh in on Musk's $1 million voter raffle. But what are voters there saying about all of this?
Well, there were hundreds that lined up to see Elon Musk, and there were hundreds that lined up to protest the billionaire's event last night. And we spoke with some voters, and for them, this is just another example on the Democratic side of saying he's attempting to buy yet another election. And on the Republican side, voters said all is fair in love and war. This is how the game is played now, and they were unbothered by it. But here's a snapshot of the voter sentiment here in Wisconsin that we heard.
Do you feel like Musk's $1 million giveaway is bribing an election?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think everybody here would say that's not why we're here. I mean, it's at least very transparent.
He's trying to buy the election. He's trying to pay people to vote.
He's the richest man in the world. He's got endless amounts of money. Who else is he going to try and buy next?
Elon Musk has spent $3 million of his own money in addition to over $12 million from his America PAC. And on the Democratic side, there are also billionaire donors like Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and George Soros. The difference is, though, is that to our knowledge, we haven't seen any of those offering $1 million giveaways. But Elon Musk is not afraid to spend his time, his posts on X, or his money in this race, even creating a door-knocking program that offers financial incentives to canvassers to turn out the vote here in tomorrow's race, Anna.
All right, Julia Jester, thank you so much for reporting there in Madison, Wisconsin for us. Susan, a lot of that event with Elon Musk was actually more about his views, his actions, about Doge, less about the candidate he was there to support. Given all the backlash we've seen against Doge and all these federal cuts, what do you make of that strategy?
Well, it's certainly all about Elon Musk, and no one's happier than Donald Trump. Because if the Republican wins, it's a nonpartisan race, but if the Republican likely candidate wins, then Trump will take a victory lap and say, yeah, Elon Musk is my guy. Look what happened. If the person loses, then guess what? He says it was the Elon Musk fault. So it works out really well. But, it's so interesting when we look at this race. It's important to keep in mind 2 years ago, it was the most important state Supreme Court race in the country. It was deemed the same way. It broke records at $50 million in spending.
That was in the wake of the Dobbs ruling.
And that was in the wake of Dobbs, exactly. And what was on stake was reproductive rights. The Democrat won by 11 points. We used it as a way of judging the Biden presidency and what 2024 will look like. So that didn't exactly go the way, 2024 didn't follow 2023. So we have to be careful just how much we read into these elections.
Well, and Julie, Elon Musk and his super PAC are also putting quite a bit of money behind a couple of races in Florida for special election House seats. These should be safe Republican-held seats. Yet it appears to be a little more competitive than Republicans initially expected. Do you see these early races as sort of a national referendum on party enthusiasm for both parties?
I do to some extent, but let's be realistic. First and foremost, Elon Musk is talking about this being a race about gerrymandering in Wisconsin. It is that, but for Elon Musk, it's about how he's able to sell Teslas in Wisconsin. He's got a very specific personal vested interest in the outcome of this race. So anybody from Wisconsin who's watching who might consider that this is about some larger issue for him, it is about his bottom line with Tesla. Second, about a week and a half ago, or almost 2 weeks ago now, in Pennsylvania, there was a special election for a state Senate seat. a seat that had been held by Republicans for generations. Part of it is in Lancaster County that has not elected a Democrat since the 19th century. And a Democrat eked out that special election win. In the wake of that is when Donald Trump decided to pull Elise Stefanik's nomination to the UN and send her back to New York 21 because by his own admission, he was very worried about how that election was going to go. Based on all of that, I don't necessarily expect those 2 seats in Florida to go Democrat because they're very, very, very red districts. But if there is a shift, a significant shift in turnout for Democrats and enthusiasm for Democrats, if Democrats come closer or even pick one of those up, most likely Florida 6, Mike Wallace's seat, that would be seismic. That would be seismic because, first of all, it would really shrink the majority for the Republicans in the House. But more importantly, it would also send a signal that Democrats are, not just Democrats, but also a lot of Republicans are just not thrilled with the way this administration is conducting business.
And a lot of that has to do with Elon Musk. Yep. I mean, we just showed the poll in Wisconsin. He's largely unpopular with American voters, and not just in Wisconsin. We've seen other polling recently, too, that shows he's underwater, negative versus positive favorability there. So what do you make of the fact, Susan, that it is Musk, not Trump, who's sort of the bullhorn, using the bullhorn to try to juice the vote on these races?
Well, what's interesting about Musk and his endorsement when it comes to Florida and looking at future House races is that it's viewed that Elon Musk's might is really with primaries, in Republican primaries, in backing candidates, not so much in these special elections, although the money doesn't hurt. And like I said, Donald Trump must have seen some numbers that maybe made him feel a little uncomfortable putting himself out there because we know he doesn't want to look like a loser. But, in Florida, again, it could happen, yes. The Democrats can pull out maybe one of those seats. But Elon Musk is really, I think, and I watch him, and I've seen so many candidates over 35 years, and I'm not saying he's a candidate, but he loves the political spotlight.
Oh, I mean, look at him there with that cheese
I don't think it's just about getting people elected that he cares about. I think this is so ego-driven, and he loves being that person. He loves being talked about in this ways. And yes, may it help him sell some cars? Absolutely. But more importantly, this is an ego-driven event, no doubt, for Elon Musk.
Julie, at the top of the hour, we played those comments from President Trump, once again floating this idea of running for a 3rd term, even though it is clearly banned in the Constitution. What do you make of it?
Well, let's be very clear. The constitutional amendment was passed in the wake of Franklin Roosevelt running for 4 terms, right? And so there's no ambiguity about what this means. There's no ambiguity about, well, if you only had, Harry Truman put in as president, and then eventually Harry Truman resigns if Roosevelt had stayed alive, and we would have had Roosevelt run for a 5th. I mean, or I guess it's passed in the 50s, so it would have been Eisenhower. But regardless, it was truly designed to prevent somebody running for more than 2 terms. And whatever loopholes they're looking for, I hope even this Supreme Court, looking at history, understands the intent behind that amendment, which is no way, no how can you serve more than 2 terms as president. I'm not so confident that the Supreme Court would allow that to happen because they have bent the rules for this president before.
But can you imagine the can of worms that would open? I mean, what's to stop another 2-term president, like former President Obama, from getting in and running against
Michelle Obama will probably stop Barack Obama in that scenario. But under normal circumstances, I mean, is there any end to this? This is how authoritarianism begins. And his hero, Vladimir Putin, pulled exactly this stunt when the Constitution of Russia prevented him from running for a 3rd consecutive term. He had his prime minister run for president, and he decided to be prime minister, and then they did the switcheroo.
So you're saying there is a playbook, ladies. Got to leave it there for now. Thank you. Of course, conversation always accountability. Yet, in a phone call with NBC News, President Trump says he has no plans to fire anyone on his team, saying, quote, "I don't fire people because of fake news and because of witch hunts." But according to reporting by the New York Times, behind the scenes, the president is asking aides and allies for advice on how to move forward with his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. Let's go to NBC's Von Hilliard live from the White House, and Caroline Zier, former deputy chief of staff for former Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Okay, Vaughn, the president on this call told Kristen Welker that he won't fire anyone over these messages. So what's the latest thinking on this?
Right. At this point in time, he suggested that Michael Waltz had not come to him to offer his resignation and that he wouldn't want Michael Waltz to offer his resignation. And this is where you have seen in his first administration and through his campaigns, when an individual either resigns or has been fired by candidate Trump or President Trump, it's usually for questions about their fealty and their commitment to his agenda. And in the case here of each of these national security officials, including his national security advisor, that is not in question. But over the course of this last week, it is his fumbling of a straightforward response as to why he had Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number in his phone to begin with, and how he was added to that text chain with his vice president and chief of staff and others. And that is where the scrutiny has increased, and there were questions not so much directed at the Pentagon chief, who was the one that actually shared those attack plans, but instead on Michael Waltz, again, calling into question the criticisms that so many MAGA allies of Donald Trump had about him selecting the former Florida congressman in the first place. They have long questioned exactly the extent to which his foreign policy is aligned with that of the president.
So, Caroline, the New York Times reported on the president's deliberations on whether to fire Waltz, and they write behind the scenes, Mr. Trump has asked people inside and outside the administration what they thought he should do. He told allies that he was unhappy with the press coverage, but that he did not want to be seen as caving to a media swarm, according to several people briefed on his comments. And he also said he was reluctant to fire people in the senior ranks so early in his second term. Now, you are a part of this defense world, working for former Secretary Austin. How unusual is it for there to be essentially no repercussions in the fallout of all this?
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly the right question. It's extremely unusual not to seek accountability and at a bare minimum to seek an understanding of what happened. The U.S. military, a professional military, has a responsibility and a long tradition of conducting after-action reviews, debriefs, investigations to determine how and who to hold people accountable when there has been a breach of security and a lack of operational security, particularly when it comes to a matter as important as sending men and women into harm's way, which is what the operation for the fighter pilots over Yemen was.
And so, Vaughn, the journalist involved here, Jeffrey Goldberg, he's pushing back at Waltz's continued claim that they'd never met before, that he has no idea how Goldberg's number got into his phone. Take a listen.
Very frequently in journalism, the most obvious explanation is the explanation. My phone number was in his phone because my phone number is in his phone. He's telling everyone that he's never met me or spoken to me. That's simply not true. I understand why he's doing it. But, you know, this has become a somewhat farcical situation.
Vaughn, Waltz has said there would be an investigation into how Goldberg ended up in the chat. Where does that stand? And do we know, is the administration still using the Signal app?
Right. It's a question of how they are communicating now. Of course, for generations past, administrations past, there are secure forms of communicating, regardless of where the national security officials, the Pentagon chief is. And yet what you hear Jeffrey Goldberg outlining there is the allegation that the national security advisor to the president is lying to the public about his contacts with him. And of course, this comes days after Jeffrey Goldberg published the text messages in that Signal exchange outlining that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, was lying about the contents of what he shared with others on an unsecured channel. And so over the course of this last week, Jeffrey Goldberg, through his reporting, is outlining multiple national security officials in this Trump administration that have lied to the public about their engagement, not only on this text chain, but also with him as a reporter.
Vaughn Hilliard, keep us posted on new developments. Thanks. Caroline, there is also anger now among senior Republican officials over Vice President J.D. Vance's role in that chat, with how he appeared to question the president's approach and policies toward Europe in particular. Just from a defense perspective, how did you see the VP's role in that chat?
It's a great question. From a defense perspective, what was most interesting to me in the chat is the tension you see playing out between different camps in the administration. There are those who think for some period of time we need to lean in, go harder against the Houthis for what they have done to block shipping in the Red Sea and targeting U.S. Forces and commercial activity in that area. And you see that as a pitch, as a temporary, let's do something now. And then there are those like Vice President Vance who question whether this is more burden on the shoulders of the United States. What I would point out is that the Middle East has a long history of entangling the United States. And while we think about this as temporary and a temporary push against the Houthis, I see no evidence of a plan to transition into something else, which is why it's all the more important that the safety and security of those fighter pilots as they continue these dangerous missions over Yemen is first and foremost in the administration's mind.
Yeah, we have reporting about all the military assets that are being moved into the region, in addition to what was already there, talking ships, we're talking bombers and other on Ukraine. In an exclusive phone interview with NBC News, the president lashed out at Putin for questioning the credibility of Ukrainian President Zelensky's leadership, adding that if he ends up deciding Russia is at fault for failing to reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine, he could impose secondary tariffs on all Russian oil. Let's bring in NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez. Raf, it felt rare to hear President Trump speak about Putin in this way. What's the fallout? Is the Kremlin saying anything about this?
Yeah, we are hearing from the Kremlin today. Anna, Dmitry Peskov, Putin's longtime spokesperson, briefing the press earlier and was very clear is that the Russians do not want to get into a war of words with Donald Trump. They seem to think that they are on to a good thing with the Trump administration. Peskov not really engaging with the president's language, but he said we're going to continue to work with the Americans to restore relations which were so severely damaged by the previous administration. Trump did mention to our colleague Kristen Welker in that exclusive phone call that he potentially is going to be speaking to the Russian leader this week. Peskov said that there is no call scheduled at this point, but that it could come together quickly. Just rewinding here, President Trump venting his frustration that Vladimir Putin seems to be dragging his feet on this proposed ceasefire in Ukraine. A couple of days ago, Vladimir Putin suggesting that it's not going down well, as you can imagine. Quick reminder, Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. Denmark is a NATO ally, so what the president is suggesting there is that the United States go to war with a NATO ally. You could, in theory, have a situation then where Denmark would be entirely within its rights to ask the UK, France, Germany, other members of NATO to come to its aid militarily. Interestingly, Anna, you might remember that Greenland had an election 2 weeks ago. They have now formed a government, and we are hearing from the new prime minister there, who is saying that his country needs to stand up to the United States. He says, we do not belong to others. We decide our own future. So we will see whether these threats continue and what the posture is of both Greenland and the NATO allies. Anna.
Raf Sanchez, thank you very much. A prominent Yale professor who studies fascism is leaving the U.S. amid the Trump administration's crackdown on universities and colleges. Jason Stanley, author of How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, is departing the hallowed Ivy League school to teach in Toronto, telling a philosophy website the reason is, quote, entirely because of the political climate in the United States. This comes as the Trump administration threatens to withhold funding for preeminent institutions like Columbia, which capitulated to the administration over so-called security reforms. And as grad students from Columbia and Tufts are among scholars now detained by immigration enforcement after their involvement in pro-Palestinian protests or riots. Professor and author Jason Stanley joins us now. Professor, thanks for taking the time with us. You cited the current political environment in this country as why you're leaving, why you're heading to Canada. Is it impeding you from teaching what and how you'd want to teach?
Oh, absolutely not. Yale has, to this extent, protected its scholars, unlike Columbia, who forced, for example, Catherine Frank, a prominent law professor, into early retirement. So it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with my children and my desire to send a warning to Americans that is consonant with the work I've been doing.
You talk about Colombia submitting to the White House's demands after the threats to withhold federal funding. I mean, some of what they agreed to are new rules for protests, more security officers that can make arrests, new leadership to oversee certain academic programs like Middle East studies. You called Colombia's capitulation a warning. How so?
Well, Americans don't really understand some of the details. They put never before has the federal government intervened to put a department into receivership, much less an excellent department like the Department of Middle Eastern Studies at Columbia University. And it's not new leadership. They're going to appoint perhaps a non-academic, it's someone who's obviously going to intervene in academic affairs. They're very serious about this. Receivership is only meant for when professors in a department dislike each other so much they can't be in the same room together. And needless to say, this crackdown, Colombia's capitulation to this is a grave sign about the future of academic freedom, in addition to, say, hauling people off the street and sending them to Louisiana prisons like they did at Tufts University for co-authoring op-eds in the student newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, it's Tufts, it's Columbia, Georgetown, the University of Minnesota. I mean, we keep learning of new cases of grad students or other academics being detained by ICE. And I'll note that these are people who are here legally. They have permanent residence. They're, on student visas. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said last week that these cases are just the beginning. What is the message this administration is sending by detaining these scholars and prioritizing this sort of a crackdown?
The message is that they're going to do a kind of stochastic terrorism against our country. They're going to target people one by one so that those who are in fear will shut up, essentially. And universities are filled with fear already. They're ceasing to make public statements. They're not banding together. Right now, they're targeting non-citizens for, writing in student newspapers. I'm sure, or I suspect, they'll start pulling people's passports, targeting U.S. citizens for various reasons, and exploiting Americans' ignorance. Generally, we don't know about each other's workplaces. Exploiting Americans' ignorance about academic freedom, and they're trying to, and I fear they will succeed in destroying America's higher education system, which is by far the best in the world.
I wonder, there are probably people watching this right now thinking, well, you have a lot to say. You are an American citizen. Why not stay and try to be the change you're seeking? Why not be part of the pushback to this sort of behavior?
I will continue to throw punches against fascism and bullies from Canada. Don't worry. I have 2 Black and Jewish kids. I think my kids actually are more important to me than anything else. So they're using my religion to go after academic freedom, crushing universities supposedly in the name of protecting my people, American Jews. My kids are Jewish. My kids are Black. They're attacking their history. And I want to send a political message, as I've been doing with my work. This comes at great personal cost. This is not I'm taking a huge salary cut. I'm not a super wealthy person. I'll still be well paid, but I'm taking like a 25% salary cut, removing myself from my homeland that I love. And I love America because it doesn't have kings. I don't love America because we can punch other people in the nose.
And so we're seeing President Trump consolidate power, pushing to quiet dissent, pressuring law firms and universities, detaining scholars. He's also attacking the judiciary and any judges who block or question his policies. How would you describe this moment for America?
It is a brutal attack on America's freedoms. It's an attack specifically on our democratic institutions. The legal system, the courts and universities and the media. And these institutions the media has been attacking universities for a decade. They've been doing Trump's work for him. So that doesn't help when the democratic institutions are working against each other. And each of these institutions, in the face of this attack on democracy and this attack on freedom by a ruler who's completely saying he wants to be a king, and a political party that's behaving like communist China and lining up 100% against him. In the face of this, universities are turning on each other, are saying, oh, we don't want to be in the public, we're going to hide under the table. So law firms stealing each other's clients. So it's not a positive development, and I'm going to continue calling it out from the University of Toronto.
Jason Stanley, let's keep in touch. Thank you very much for being on our show and providing your perspective and some expertise as well. We appreciate it.